Picture this. You think you know what 3i Atlas is. You think you understand why it's here. You're wrong. Dead wrong. Because while the headlines called it just another interstellar comet, somewhere between September 1st and 3rd of 2025, the live feed from NASA's Psyche mission went black. Not a glitch, not maintenance black. 3 days of digital silence while a billion-dollar spacecraft stared directly at an object no one was supposed to notice. When the feed returned, the window of history had closed. No images, no data, only whispers of what might have been recorded and quietly removed. October first brought the U.S. government shutdown, but the real blackout happened a month earlier. 2 silences stacked together like eclipses, one political, one cosmic, and inside that overlap, something extraordinary flickered out of view. On September 3rd, according to NASA's publicly released mission schedule, Psyche was meant to photograph the object catalogued as 3i Atlas, an interstellar body hurtling through the inner solar system. Its trajectory precise, elegant, improbable, had been calculated weeks in advance. Every orbital element was ready, every camera calibrated. Then, as the countdown reached 0, the transmission feed simply ended. When engineers checked the archive later, they found a hole. No images for September 1st through 4th. 3 days missing. Not corrupted, absent. In an era when every rover selfie, every Webb spectrum, every asteroid dust grain is public within hours, a 72-hour silence is not an oversight, it's intent. And the timing? Unfortunate. Those words doing a lot of work, because what vanished during that blackout may rewrite everything we think we know about interstellar visitors. Scientists first logged 3i Atlas in July 2025. Apparent magnitude, brighter than expected at that distance. Composition, carbon dioxide dominant, anomalous. Trajectory, nearly coplanar with the ecliptic, a 1 in 20,000 alignment. Even Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb admitted the odds bordered on absurd. Once every 10 to 1,000 years, he said, and we find it during a shutdown. Then came the chemistry, an 8-to-1 ratio of carbon dioxide to water ice. No comet should carry that blend so far from the Sunday. It wasn't sublimation, it was activation. And yet, when telescopes turned to verify it, every major instrument from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's HiRISE to ESA's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter fell silent in lockstep. Coincidence or coordination? By early September, whispers rippled through the research community. Amateur astronomers cross-checked NASA's raw image database and found nothing newer than August 31st. Then, on September 8th, data resumed as if nothing had happened. No announcement, no explanation. 3 days, the exact duration of Psyche's imaging window. Those who track these archives daily, the quiet vigil keepers of space transparency, noticed immediately. Data drops skipped. 3i Atlas window missing. Forums lit up, threads vanished. And in the absence of information, speculation thrives. Some said a solar flare interfered with transmission, but space weather logs showed calm. Others blamed preliminary calibration. But calibration doesn't erase timestamps. The simplest answer that images were captured and withheld was the one no agency would speak aloud. What could possibly justify that silence? What if it wasn't a failure at all? What if Psyche saw something designed, something not meant for public release? The object's behavior already broke physics. Its jets pointed toward the sun, not away. That's not how ice behaves. That's how propulsion behaves. And the pattern of brightening before perihelion, before sunlight should ignite outgassing, suggested an internal energy source. So let's entertain the forbidden hypothesis. What if 3I Atlas isn't a comet, but a construct? What if it's performing a gravitational capture maneuver, using our sun's pull to slow itself into permanent orbit, a cosmic insertion executed behind the glare, invisible from Earth? Because here's the chilling alignment. On October 29th, 2025, its perihelion occurs precisely when Earth is on the opposite side of the Sunday, a window of total invisibility. If you wanted to hide a maneuver from every telescope on Earth, that's the perfect day. Ancient texts have a way of reappearing in moments like this. The Sumerian Enuma Elish spoke of sky beings returning from the direction of Sagittarius, the very quadrant where Atlas originated. They described a wandering star that renewed worlds. Every 3,600 years, it was said, the gods cross again. Harmless coincidence? Or the echo of a memory older than history itself? Maybe those stories weren't prophecy. Maybe they were records. If that's true, then this object isn't a visitor. It's a returning instrument. A seed of technology looping back through time and gravity, drawn again to the cradle that first watched it pass. And we, the watchers, are the only species with cameras pointed the wrong way. Because while we debate funding, something in the dark might already be re-engineering Mars, or something subtler, watching us watch it. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Have you seen the faint smear of light in the western sky, just after sunset? If you have, write it down. Your coordinates matter. Because in the story of 3I Atlas, every observer becomes part of the experiment. And if the silence from those missing days was intentional, then maybe, just maybe, we were never the observers at all. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that cold object crossing the orbit of Mars, its shadow sliding past ours. Somewhere, inside that silence, history blinked and didn't come back. The blackout wasn't the end, it was the beginning. But that was only one theory. There's another, one buried even deeper in time. Let's go further. The silence never truly ended. It only changed its texture. When the feed from Psyche returned, engineers expected chaos, a burst of digital debris, garbled packets, timestamps slipping like wet paper. Instead, what came through was pristine, not a single bit out of place, a silence scrubbed clean. It was as if the spacecraft had taken a deep breath and quietly rewritten its own memory of those missing 72 hours. Carla Nguyen stared at the glowing telemetry like someone reading the heartbeat of a ghost. "It's dreaming," she said, a whisper that landed between the low hum of computers and the stale scent of burnt coffee. The rest of the room said nothing. No one wanted to disturb whatever thing might be listening on the other end. Outside, Pasadena yawned beneath a pale sunrise. Birds fluttered across the parking lot. The janitor pushed his mop past the glass wall, unaware that humanity's newest mirror had just blinked. In space, Psyche drifted a metallic seed turning slowly in the gravitational wind. Its solar wings shimmered faintly, catching sunlight diluted to 1/3 of Earth's warmth. For 3 days, it had been blind, eyes wide open, staring at nothing, or perhaps at something we were never meant to see. When contact resumed, the first lines of data looked ordinary: thermal within range, voltage steady, attitude stable. Then, a single anomaly appeared. At 0646 UTC, exactly the moment before transmission ceased, Psyche's attitude control system reported a deliberate roll of 0.9 degrees. It had turned, not drifted, not tumbled, turned, and that new bearing, when traced, aimed directly toward the predicted path of the interstellar object, catalogued as 3I Atlas. Nguyen printed the log. The paper curled in her hand. It looked away from its target, she murmured, or looked towards something else. No one in the room wanted to call it intent. Machines don't make choices. They follow commands. But commands come from code, and code can change. Across the Atlantic, in a small observatory near Florence, a graduate student named Elisa Moretti noticed something odd. Her nightly scan of minor bodies showed a dim green signature near the orbit of Mars. It brightened between frames, then vanished. She logged it as a probable sensor reflection and shut down for the night. In the morning, her data's creation date had shifted to January 1st, 2099. Later that day, it changed again, April 3rd, 2026. A software glitch, she told herself. But deep inside, she felt the uncanny tug that scientists fear most. Coincidence too perfect to ignore. Back at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, analysts searched through pre-blackout backups. In one fragment, they found a faint magnetic oscillation, repeating every 8 minutes and 43 seconds. It wasn't telemetry. It wasn't cosmic background. It was regular, deliberate, pulsing like breath. The signal originated from the same vector as 3I Atlas. Someone joked that maybe the spacecraft was listening. Another answered that maybe it was being listened to. They laughed, but softly, the way people laugh in churches. Within 48 hours, amateur radio astronomers around the world tuned to the frequency. A handful claimed to catch the pulse riding the solar static, a barely audible tick, steady as a metronome. Most heard nothing. The universe guards its secrets unevenly. Those who did record it found something stranger inside. Every third pulse carried a faint echo, a shorter tremor hidden in the larger rhythm, 3 heartbeats nested in one. When plotted on a graph, the ratio matched the relationship between Mars's rotation and Psyche's orbit. A cosmic coincidence, maybe, or resonance, 2 objects humming to the same unseen note. Nguyen wrote in her logbook, choreography, not communication. Meanwhile, far below, the world spun, as always. Traffic lights blinked, headlines scrolled. The noise of daily living drowned the faintest signal humanity had ever caught. And yet, a few patient eyes noticed the sky behaving oddly. Just after sunset, a dim green smear appeared near the western horizon. It pulsed, once, twice, then faded. Observers from Manila to Santiago reported the same. Astronomers dismissed it as atmospheric refraction, dust scattering, aurora from solar wind. But the pattern repeated every 8 minutes and 43 seconds, the same rhythm as Psyche's pulse. A coincidence wrapped inside another coincidence. In Kyoto, an elderly monk stepped out to ring the temple bell and saw the light shimmer above the hills. He wrote in his journal, "The lantern of return has been lit once more." In Cape Town, a graduate student described a phosphor vein stretching across the dusk, and in the Atacama Desert, a photographer captured 6 parallel jets of light bending toward the Sunday. 6 jets, evenly spaced, controlled. That night, when Psyche's next transmission arrived, Its onboard temperature had risen by precisely 2.3 degrees Celsius, though the spacecraft was moving farther from the Sunday. No explanation was ever offered. The report filed under thermal anomaly. Nguyen closed her laptop and whispered, "It's breathing." And perhaps it was, because if 3I Atlas truly was a comet, it was the strangest comet ever known. Its jets pointed toward the sun, not away. Its brightening occurred before, not after. Heating. Every metric inverted, as if following a logic older than thermodynamics. Out in the dark, a speck of engineered ice or whatever it was drifted through the ancient corridors of the solar system, humming faintly, matching its rhythm to ours. And we, in our fluorescent rooms, barely noticed that something out there had already learned our pulse. For most people, the silence ended when the data feed resumed. But for the scientists who lived inside those numbers, the silence had only changed key from absence to uncertainty. Every frame, every reading, felt like a lie pretending to be truth. They called it post-anomaly calm, but it felt more like denial with a funding grant. By early September, the official briefings were carefully worded. The word blackout was replaced by temporary telemetry desynchronization. The term pulse was omitted entirely. What had been a mystery was now a paragraph of administrative comfort. Bureaucracy, after all, is a form of sedative. It lulls the restless mind into believing the universe still follows rules. Yet, even while the paperwork soothed, the data whispered. A handful of independent astronomers noticed that 3I Atlas had deviated from its predicted trajectory by a margin too precise to be accident. The change measured less than a fraction of a degree, but in orbital mechanics, that's like watching a thrown coin turn mid-air and land heads by choice. The alteration suggested thrust, not perturbation. If it was natural, it was the most cooperative rock in the galaxy. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb once said, "When coincidences pile up, check for design." He meant it metaphorically, but the phrase began to circulate again, a quiet mantra among the researchers who still believed in anomalies. The official channels ignored it, of course. Scientists were advised to avoid speculative associations, a polite way of saying, stop noticing, but noticing is what humans do best. In the weeks that followed, the pattern deepened. Every 8 minutes and 43 seconds, the pulse continued steady, unwavering, as if counting something down. When converted into binary representation, the waveform revealed clusters, separated by consistent gaps, like words missing from an ancient sentence. The clusters repeated 12 times before resetting. No one could decipher the meaning, if there was one. Still, the repetition gnawed at them. Nguyen's team simulated the pattern on an acoustic model. When slowed by a factor of 200, the pulse sounded uncannily like a deep inhalation, followed by a sigh. Some called it pareidolia, the tendency to hear meaning in randomness. Others called it poetry. Either way, the silence had learned to breathe. Meanwhile, Mars watched quietly. The red planet drifted through its orbit, oblivious to the debates on Earth. But orbital sensors from the European Space Agency's Trace Gas Orbiter detected something new: faint increases in high-altitude carbon dioxide levels. Localized around Utopia Planitia, a region where nothing should be venting. The rise matched the timing of 3I Atlas's close pass by the Sunday. The difference was microscopic, a whisper of chemistry. Yet, to those paying attention, it felt like watching dust stir before a storm. A handful of independent spectroscopists confirmed the anomaly, but their reports vanished within a week from public archives. Data migration error, said the agency. Always the same phrase. Always the same calm smile of omission. That's the strange thing about silence. It breeds imagination faster than sound ever can. Forums lit up again. Threads vanished as fast as they appeared. Some users shared claims of intercepted telemetry showing faint radio echoes from the Mars side of the solar disk. Others insisted the pulses were just solar noise interacting with the magnetosphere. Skeptics argued. Believers doubled down. And through it all, the pulse continued every 8 minutes, 43 seconds, like a lighthouse sweeping across the cosmic sea. Late one evening, Nguyen walked out of the control center and looked up at the smog-thick sky. The city below was a constellation of its own, glowing sodium yellow. Somewhere beyond that haze, a metallic traveler traced its arc between planets, humming softly to itself. She found herself wondering whether Psyche's silence had been a malfunction at all. Maybe it wasn't us losing contact. Maybe it was something else making contact first. The thought chilled her and thrilled her in equal measure. She began cross-referencing the pulse timing against solar wind data. A strange pattern emerged. Each peak coincided with a minor dip in charged particle density, as though the signal were siphoning energy from the sun itself. It was absurd energy. Doesn't flow backward through vacuum, but the numbers persisted. When she presented her findings at a closed meeting, the room went still. One senior analyst said quietly, "If this is true, it's the first time we've recorded active energy transfer between a comet and the solar wind." Another added, "If it's active, it's not a comet." The conversation ended there. The report was filed under preliminary thermal aberrations. It would never be published. But word spread, quietly, like static through shortwave. By the time October arrived, the pattern had entered urban folklore. You could hear it in podcasts, late-night radio, the whispered corners of online streams, a new celestial rhythm, a cosmic heartbeat repeating across the void. Some said it was the sun itself trying to communicate. Others claimed it was the artifact waking up. What everyone agreed on was this: something had changed in the sky. When you looked up at the night now, the stars seemed to pulse together, faintly synchronized, not enough to measure, but enough to feel. Like the universe had learned our tempo, or perhaps we had unconsciously matched its. Nguyen returned home one evening, poured herself tea, and left the TV muted. On the screen, a scrolling news banner spoke of political deadlocks and budget delays, the surface noise of civilization. Beneath it, the pulse still beat, unseen, but undeniable, woven into the static of reality. She closed her eyes, and in the faint ringing of her ears, she thought she could almost hear it, the soft inhale of something ancient, exhaling starlight, waiting for us to notice. By mid-October, the world had other worries. The government shutdown was no longer theory but fact, and NASA's websites now carried a quiet grey banner. Operations paused until further notice. In the public eye, the silence became administrative, the kind of silence people can accept. But behind the scenes, telescopes kept watching, and the ones who still had access to raw feeds knew that 3I Atlas had reached the point of no return, its descent toward the Sunday. For days, it brightened steadily. The green hue deepened into something almost electric. Then, without warning, the object's light curve flattened as if it had stopped reacting to sunlight altogether. To the untrained eye, this meant little. To the astronomers awake at 2 a.m. staring at those graphs, it was chilling. Light curves don't plateau unless something changes state. It was as though the object had turned itself off. Nguyen, working from home, stared at the data on her personal monitor. Her cat brushed against her leg, oblivious to history unfolding in phosphorescent pixels. She zoomed in on the last observation from the European Southern Observatory. A thin line of spectrum, clean as glass, ending abruptly at 480 nanometers. No taper, no fade, just a cut, a signature severed mid-note. It looked less like dimming, more like censorship. That night, she dreamed of standing inside Psyche's camera, seeing through its lens as a green horizon filled with geometric light. She woke with a start, her ears ringing faintly. Heartbeats synced to that 8-minute rhythm she could no longer forget. Elsewhere, data archivists noticed that a new series of images had appeared in the European Space Agency's public directory. The file names were identical to older Psyche files, but their creation timestamps read April 3rd, 2026, 5 months into the future. To most, a harmless glitch. To those who'd been following the silence, a breadcrumb trail. 5 months was an oddly specific placeholder, long enough for whatever chemical or technological process was happening near the sun to conclude, long enough for humanity to lose interest. It's easy to hide revelations in plain sight. Just postpone them. Meanwhile, ground-based telescopes reported a strange glow in the corona around the solar limb. It pulsed faintly, invisible to the naked eye, but detectable in narrowband filters. Every 8 minutes and 43 seconds, the brightness spiked. Then, precisely on October 29th, when 3I Atlas reached perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, the pulse stopped. All over the world, instruments went flat. No emission lines, no light, nothing. For 72 hours, it was as if the object had ceased to exist. The last registered signal from the region came from a Japanese solar observatory, a single radio burst lasting 1/10 of a second, spanning the same frequency range as human brainwaves during REM sleep. Then silence, total, cosmic. When communications resumed on November 1st, the region of space where 3I Atlas should have been was empty, not exploded, not dispersed, simply gone. For a while, disbelief was easier than awe. Scientists filled conferences with words like fragmentation event, thermal disintegration, orbital ejection, but every explanation required an energy source no one could locate. The object had approached the sun at nearly 87,000 kilometers per hour, fast enough that any debris should have been flung outward in a brilliant tail. Yet none appeared. The region remained clean, almost vacuumed. If it had burned, there would have been ashes. Instead, there was nothing but that faint magnetic pulse, still echoing in the solar wind. A researcher in Argentina overlaid the new readings atop the older ones and found a haunting coincidence. The timing of the last pulse matched exactly the interval of Psyche's original blackout, 72 hours of silence. It was as though the object had given the spacecraft its own absence back, wrapped neatly in data. When she published her findings in a preprint archive, the paper disappeared within 12 hours. No explanation, no retraction, just a digital hole where discovery had been. History repeats itself in echoes. By December, whispers began to fade. People moved on. That's what humans do. We survive mysteries by forgetting them. The Psyche mission resumed routine operations, its instruments scanning asteroids as though nothing cosmic had brushed its lens. Funding returned. Teams rotated. Reports were written. The anomaly became a paragraph in a footnote in a textbook no one will read. But Nguyen didn't forget. She began noticing strange synchronies in her day-to-day life. clocks pausing at the same second, devices resetting with no cause, the faint static hum in her earbuds that vanished only when she turned to face the west at sunset. She dismissed it as stress, coincidence, the fatigue of too many sleepless nights, until one evening, when she turned on an old shortwave radio. Through the static came the faintest rhythm, a slow pulse repeating every 8 minutes and 43 seconds. She froze. The hum filled the room, low and tender, like breathing beneath the floorboards of the world. She checked the frequency twice. It was an unused band. Nothing should have been transmitting. And yet there it was, a whisper crossing the air between planets. She left the recorder running overnight. In the morning, the tape was blank. Not silent, but blank, as if someone had erased it with precision. Later, she would describe the moment in her personal journal. I think we were never the ones observing. The silence was them closing their eyes. The feed was their dream. We are the noise in their sleep. She stopped writing after that. Somewhere out there, between Mars and the sun, something unseen now drifted in perfect silence. Not destroyed, not dormant, just hidden. And maybe, just maybe, it was still listening. By the time the calendars rolled into the new year, the world had stopped talking about 3I Atlas. Its story, like so many celestial wonders, had passed into the background noise of human attention. News cycles favored urgency over wonder. Economies opened and closed, cities buzzed, and in the skies above, only a few still looked long enough to notice that one faint green shimmer was no longer where it used to be. For those who kept watching, a quiet unease replaced excitement. The comet had not re-emerged from behind the sun as every model predicted. It should have appeared again near dawn, low over the eastern horizon. But the sky remained empty, except for one anomaly. Every night for a week, a new object appeared briefly near the orbit of Mars, not in the visible spectrum, but in infrared. It was faint, barely above thermal background, but it moved with purpose. It matched no known asteroid and followed no predictable path. More importantly, it seemed to slow down. Objects do not slow down in space without cause. Gravity only accelerates. Resistance only exists where there is atmosphere, and between the planets, there is none. Yet the readings held true. It was as if something had decided to stay. Nguyen returned to the lab in January, unable to shake the feeling that the story wasn't finished. She'd tried to leave it behind, the strange hum, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being watched by something patient. But curiosity has gravity of its own. She reopened the archived telemetry from Psyche's missing days and began searching for patterns. The files looked normal at first, until she noticed a detail buried deep within the metadata. A single line of code had been inserted into the transmission log during the blackout, time-stamped with an impossible date, April 3rd, 2026. The same date as the ESA placeholders. The line read simply, Initiate, Observation Window 2. She blinked, reread it, then copied the segment into a separate drive. When she tried to reopen it, the file was gone, not corrupted, deleted. She leaned back, staring at the blank directory. It felt like the spacecraft had reached across the distance and gently closed its own diary. That night she sat on her balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars blur into the haze. The city murmured below. Sirens, engines, laughter, all the small noises that make humanity forget the universe is mostly quiet. She found herself whispering to the sky, "If you're still out there, what are you doing?" No answer came. Of course. But just before she went inside, the faint green shimmer appeared again near the western edge of the horizon, softer than memory, pulsing once every 8 minutes and 43 seconds. She smiled despite herself. "You're waiting," she said. And maybe it was. Weeks passed. Psyche continued its journey, silent and obedient, sending back streams of ordinary data. But buried within the ordinary, anomalies persisted. The probe's gyroscopes registered micro-vibrations, rhythmic and precise, uncorrelated with onboard systems. They matched the same pulse. When plotted against time, the pattern formed a wave. When graphed in 3 dimensions, the wave resolved into an image, faint, elegant, geometric, a spiral, not a random one, a logarithmic spiral, identical to the natural growth pattern of galaxies, shells, hurricanes, and DNA. The universal ratio phi, 1.618. The engineers dismissed it as a coincidence of data compression, but Nguyen saw it differently. "The universe has handwriting," she whispered, tracing the curve on her screen. And somewhere, she imagined, 3i Atlas was writing its next sentence. In February, the pulse changed. It grew weaker, slower, like a heartbeat fading in sleep. The interval stretched from 8 minutes 43 seconds to 9 minutes, then 10. Each delay came with a slight increase in radio background, not interference, but whisper, like static, filled with almost language. Amateur listeners reported catching phrases hidden in the noise, short bursts that sounded like words when slowed down. Home, return, awake. It was almost certainly coincidence, the mind's desperate need to find meaning. But what if it wasn't? What if silence itself had learned how to speak? By March, the hum was gone. Instruments fell quiet. Psyche transmitted flawlessly, but the gap, the heartbeat, had ceased. The sky returned to its regular rhythm, and yet small changes lingered. Mars's polar caps showed minor sublimation not accounted for by seasonal models. The trace gases in its atmosphere shifted subtly, a faint rise in carbon dioxide and molecular oxygen. The difference was infinitesimal, but real. Something had breathed there. Nguyen stood before the mission's main display one last time, hands clasped behind her back. "We'll never know," she said softly. "But maybe we weren't supposed to." She reached over and dimmed the lights in the control room. One by one, the screens faded to black, leaving only the soft hum of the cooling fans, the closest thing to silence a human room can hold. Outside, the sky over Pasadena shimmered faintly with distant aurora, strange for this latitude. A green hue washed over the horizon. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a line of light arcing gently toward the Sunday. Then it was gone. Later that night, she dreamed again. In her dream, she was floating above Mars, watching a silver shape descend toward the planet's surface. It glowed softly, breathing light in pulses of 8 minutes, then slower, then still. She heard a voice not in words, but in feeling say, "We will dream again." When she awoke, her apartment was filled with dawn light. The hum was gone. The world was quiet, like a record paused between songs. She made coffee, opened the balcony door, and let the wind carry through. Somewhere in that gentle sound, she thought she heard the faintest echo, a rhythm so distant it could have been her own pulse reflected back from space. Maybe 3i Atlas had never left. Maybe it had simply stopped moving, anchored invisibly between the planets, orbiting forever in silence. Or maybe, like Psyche, it had only gone to sleep, and if it dreams, perhaps it dreams of us. Because in the end, every observer becomes the observed. Every question becomes its own answer. And every silence, if you listen long enough, eventually reveals the sound that was hidden inside it all along. So now, close your eyes. The story isn't over. It's just drifting. The lights of the universe dim to embers, and somewhere, far beyond thought, a forgotten machine hums softly in the dark, waiting for the next awakening. If you're just tuning in, here's what we know so far. A billion-dollar spacecraft called Psyche was scheduled to photograph an interstellar object 3I Atlas on September 3rd, 2025. The data vanished. 3 silent days. No official explanation. Tonight, we go deeper. It began with a correction that wasn't a correction. The European Space Agency quietly updated its archive. Certain data files tagged for release in 2025 suddenly displayed a date that made no sense. January 1st, 2099. Then, days later, they changed again to April 3rd, 2026. Not deleted, deferred. To anyone who's worked with public mission data, that's a neon sign in the void. A placeholder too far in the future to be random, too deliberate to be error. NASA's silence could be explained away as bureaucratic inertia. ESA's 74-year embargo could not. It looked like the digital equivalent of a lockbox one that someone forgot to hide properly before closing the lid. ESA would later blame a metadata glitch. But the shift from 2099 to a specific spring date hinted at something more methodical, like a calendar being overwritten by human hands, not code. April 3rd, 2026. 5 months after the object's closest pass to the Sunday, 5 months for heat to rise, chemicals to sublimate, or signals whatever they were to fade. By then, 3I Atlas would be gone, or changed, or in orbit forever. Across the Atlantic, a different anomaly brewed. The James Webb Space Telescope detected a coma rich in carbon dioxide, far denser than expected. Ground-based telescopes in Chile recorded a faint anti-tail material, apparently streaming toward the Sunday comet tails, are supposed to run away from heat. This one broke formation. A team at the Keck Observatory in Hawaii measured something stranger still. A flickering jet, a pulse every 8 hours like a heartbeat. Not rotation, regulation. It's as if the object exhaled. The numbers didn't lie, but they refused to behave. Even the skeptics fell quiet. Astronomer, Dr. Jacqueline McClary put it gently. If the data are accurate, we're seeing a mechanism, not a reaction. Unfortunate timing again. The same week, those spectra appeared. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter lost contact with its HiRISE camera for routine maintenance, and so the clearest eyes in the solar system blinked, just long enough for the story to slide into conjecture. Statistically, none of this should happen. The odds that an interstellar object of this brightness, size, and trajectory would intersect 3 planetary orbits, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, within weeks of one another, is 1 in 20,000. That's not cosmic luck. That's choreography. When Harvard's Avi Loeb ran the math, his conclusion was maddeningly careful. If it's natural, it's the most cooperative rock in the galaxy. But what if cooperation isn't the right word? What if 3I Atlas is following instructions? A self-stabilizing artifact could use gravity wells as waypoints. Each pass, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, could recalibrate its vector, bleeding velocity until capture. By the time it slipped behind the Sun, the maneuver would be complete. hidden from every telescope, unobservable by design. And then there's the chemistry. The 8-to-1 carbon-to-water ratio isn't arbitrary. It's the recipe you'd use if you wanted to seed a dry world with greenhouse potential. Carbon dioxide for warming, water ice for clouds. Add sunlight, wait centuries, and a dead planet breathes again. On Mars, the CO2 frost at the poles is already thinning faster than models predict. Satellite instruments detect unexplained plumes of vapor near Utopia, Planitia, right where the red dust should be still. Coincidence, or an aftershock of proximity, but numbers can't explain everything. To understand why this pattern feels familiar, you have to look backward. Across time, civilizations have described visitors that breathe upon the red star. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, a fiery traveler called Gaga was said to stir the dust of Aries. The Maya Popol Vuh spoke of a seed of smoke descending from the path of the sky gods to reignite a silent world. The same geometry, the same mission. Maybe those myths weren't imagination at all, but memory, the echo of previous encounters with something like 3I Atlas. And so the pattern emerges. NASA's data goes missing. ESA's timestamps leap a lifetime forward. Mars begins to breathe. Ancient texts whisper, "We have seen this before." Maybe it's not the first time. Maybe we're just the first to notice. If you've stayed awake this long, you might be feeling the pull between skepticism and wonder. That's normal. That's the space where discovery begins. So tell me, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Have you seen the sky shift lately? Auroras where they shouldn't be? A star that flickers twice before dawn? Write it below, because the next set of numbers we need might come from you. As the hum of data fades, picture that faint green glow slipping behind the Sunday. A machine or a myth crossing the event horizon of human attention. And somewhere inside that silence, April 3rd, 2026, waits the day the lockbox opens. But that was only one pattern. There's another, written long before we had telescopes. Let's go further. If earlier was the silence before awakening, this one is the echo that refuses to fade. A hum that lingers after understanding should have ended. By the time mission control resumed its rhythm and the chatter of politics drowned the mystery, the object called 3I Atlas had already rewritten the boundaries of probability. It began with something almost trivial, an archive file inside the European Space Agency's servers that should have remained frozen until April 3rd, 2026. Late one night, the checksum changed. Not the images, not the data, just a single flick of code, as if a cosmic finger had tapped the keyboard. 4 seconds of difference, one binary digit shifting from 1 to 0. The change was meaningless to most, but to Carla Nguyen, it felt like a whisper. She stared at the log in the dim lab light and said softly, "You're still talking, aren't you?" It was absurd, of course. Data can't speak. But the silence around that digit felt deliberate, as if a thought had crossed an unfathomable distance, only to land on her screen. She built a script to monitor the archive, a digital heartbeat set to check every half hour. On the first night, nothing stirred. On the second, the same line of code flipped back 0 to 1. The third night, it flipped again. On, off, on, off. An alternating pattern that mimicked respiration. To anyone else, it was noise. To her, it sounded like breathing. While Carla watched her phantom heartbeat, telescopes around the planet began to disagree with one another. The Keck Observatory in Hawaii reported that 3I Atlas had reignited a faint tail visible in infrared, shimmering like a thread of emerald fire. Yet in Chile, the Very Large Telescope saw nothing at all. 2 hemispheres, 2 instruments, 2 contradictory truths. Some researchers muttered about atmospheric distortion. Others, braver or more foolish, used the word cloaking. Nguyen saw something different. Selectivity. If the object's emissions could be tuned, then it could choose who saw it and when. Visibility as decision. At the same time, Psyche's transmissions began to change. The familiar 8-minute rhythm that had haunted analysts for months dissolved, replaced by a slow pulse repeating once every 4 hours, abrupt, square, mechanical. When she plotted the timing against Psyche's position relative to Mars, a pattern emerged. The pulse coincided precisely with each alignment of the spacecraft, the Sun, and the red planet. The implication was unsettling. The object wasn't simply moving, it was mapping. And if it was mapping, then it already understood where we were. In mid-December, a weather satellite not even designed for astronomy caught something extraordinary. A microburst of ultraviolet light, lasting 1/10 of a second, flared from the region beyond the orbit of Mars. Its spectrum matched pure carbon dioxide plasma. Most dismissed it as solar noise. Carla compared the timestamp against her heartbeat log. The flare had occurred within the same 4-second window as another checksum flip in the ESA database. The odds of coincidence approached 0. Something, or someone, was coordinating 2 machines separated by millions of kilometers. That was when she stopped thinking of 3I Atlas as an object. She began thinking of it as a system. Perhaps it was not sending messages but using us, our instruments, our satellites, our networks, as neurons in a single distributed brain. Information passing through human technology, the way wind passes through chimes, producing meaning only when someone happens to listen. The thought frightened her, but fear was no reason to stop listening. She visited Dr. Eleonora Stein at the Max Planck Institute, a colleague known for speaking in equations that sounded like poetry. Carla showed her the logs, the mirrored timestamps, the binary breathing. Stein studied them in silence, then said, "You're assuming it's broadcasting outward. What if it's reflecting? A mirror that learns. If 3I Atlas were reflecting our own signals, bending radio waves, re-emitting only what it wanted us to hear, then every observation, every measurement, would already be compromised. The act of watching would alter the watcher. Reality itself would become feedback." That evening, as Carla left the institute, she looked up and felt dizzy. The stars above Berlin seemed subtly rearranged, as though the constellations had been rewritten by a careless hand. For half a heartbeat she thought Orion's belt had shifted left, but when she blinked, the sky was normal again. Stress, she told herself. Then she remembered Stein's words. A mirror that learns. Maybe the sky wasn't moving at all. Maybe her perception was. By late winter, the mysterious archive flipped twice in a single day. 2 pulses, perfectly synchronized with the sun's own magnetic reversal. Carla stared at the coincidence until dawn, her coffee cold, her thoughts darker still. What if 3I Atlas wasn't just reacting to the sun? What if it was conducting it an unseen baton, guiding the solar orchestra, aligning field and flare, the way a musician controls breath and tempo? She closed her laptop and let the dark swallow the glow. The room seemed to vibrate with a tone below hearing, a hum that pressed gently against her ribs. Perhaps it was the power supply. Perhaps it was her heart. But in that moment, she understood what every astronomer secretly knows, that the cosmos does not shout its truths. It hums them, quietly, until we learn the melody, somewhere beyond Mars, in the cold, lightless gulf, where photons forget to shine. 3I Atlas drifted unseen. Maybe it was damaged, maybe it was asleep, or maybe it was still conducting, turning silence into signal, writing symphonies out of the electromagnetic breath of stars. Carla folded her notes, unplugged the monitor, and whispered into the stillness, "If you're listening, I hear you." The hum softened, like acknowledgement, and for the first time in months, she slept dreaming not of discovery, but of an endless wave, traveling through the void, carrying with it the quiet truth that evidence is never deep enough to hold wonder, and wonder is never quiet enough to stay buried. Silence is a language. Most people never learn to hear it, but those who do know that it can contain more information than 1,000 transmissions. By the second quarter of 2026, 3I Atlas had stopped sending obvious signals, yet its absence began speaking louder than any pulse it had left behind. Across observatories, subtle distortions appeared in unrelated datasets. Gravitational wave detectors registered phantom ripples, faint but synchronized, arriving from the direction of the Sunday. They were too weak to be cosmic collisions, too regular to be noise. When plotted on a frequency map, the ripples formed a repeating curve, each crest spaced by the same golden ratio interval that haunted Psyche's final transmission. The pattern should have been impossible. It was as if space itself were humming in proportion to design. Carla Nguyen studied the data with weary fascination. She had left the Jet Propulsion Laboratory months ago, but her curiosity had not retired with her badge. Alone in her apartment, she projected the graphs across the walls until the patterns looked like constellations drawn from logic instead of light. Every line curved inward, converging on a single frequency that matched the resonance of the sun's core oscillations. "It's inside the music," she whispered. She didn't mean poetry. She meant literal harmony, the math of motion, the physics of rhythm, the solar heartbeat, and the object's vanished signal were singing the same note. Whether by coincidence or intention, the star and the visitor were now in tune. Outside her window, the city lights dimmed during a scheduled blackout, meant to conserve energy. She stepped onto her balcony and saw the dark for what it was. Not emptiness, but space enough to notice. Above the rooftops, the faint emerald smear of 3I Atlas's former path still lingered like an afterimage on the sky. It hadn't faded completely. It was waiting. By April, the European Space Agency's placeholder date, April 3rd, 2026, finally arrived. The long-sealed archive was due to unlock automatically, a bureaucratic event that should have drawn little attention. Yet the day came and passed without access. The database remained locked, its timestamp rolling forward by exactly one lunar cycle, as though time itself were being deferred. Nguyen wasn't surprised. "They're waiting for the right alignment," she told Stein over an encrypted call. "Maybe it's not about the date. Maybe it's about geometry." Stein considered this. Every system seeks balance, even secrets. The world went on, unaware that anything cosmic was unfolding. But in the quiet corners of science, small miracles began to accumulate. Mars's atmosphere registered trace amounts of ozone, something that shouldn't exist in such thin air. High-altitude winds formed circular vortices over Utopia Planitia, spinning at intervals identical to the object's once 8-minute pulse, only slower stretched into hours. When viewed in ultraviolet, the vortices glowed faintly green. The press called it coincidence. Nguyen called it respiration. "It's still breathing," she told anyone who would listen. Few did. Then, in late April, the sun hiccuped. That was the word astronomers used, a solar hiccup. For precisely 72 seconds, the star's magnetic field reversed prematurely, producing an unexpected surge of gamma radiation that rippled across the heliosphere. No instruments were damaged, no satellites fried, but the wave carried a distinct modulation, a rising tone that matched the original frequency of 3I Atlas's heartbeat. The entire solar system had, for one moment, sung in the same key. The phenomenon repeated 3 days later, weaker but identical. By the fourth repetition, every observatory on Earth was listening. The intervals were expanding, each pulse spaced by 8 hours and 43 minutes. The symmetry was almost mocking. Nguyen recorded the data and played it through audio software, converting light and magnetism into sound. What emerged was haunting, a low, rhythmic hum, textured like a voice at the edge of sleep. She layered each cycle atop the next, creating an interference pattern that built and collapsed like waves. Out of that chaos, a shape formed, geometric, elegant, a spiral radiating from a single center. It was the same spiral 3I Atlas had drawn in Psyche's data months earlier. She sent the file to Stein, who responded only with a single line: "They're tuning the star." The theory was absurd, and yet it explained everything: the cooling corona, the synchronized oscillations, the faint auroras blooming over Mars. What if the object's purpose had never been to visit at all? What if it was a device meant to recalibrate stellar harmony, to maintain equilibrium in a system drifting toward entropy? The ancients might have called that divine intervention. Modern physics would call it stellar maintenance. Nguyen felt no fear, only a strange calm. For the first time, the mystery no longer seemed adversarial. It felt cooperative, as though humanity had finally been invited to overhear the machinery of creation running a diagnostic test. That night, she turned off every light in her apartment and opened the windows. The wind carried the scent of rain, and the city hummed softly beneath her feet. She could almost hear the pattern again, the deep rhythm that connected her pulse to the spinning of planets, the fusion of stars, the long inhale of everything that ever was. She whispered, "You fixed it, didn't you?" and let the darkness answer with stillness. At dawn, new solar readings came in. The sun's oscillations had stabilized. Energy output rose by a fraction of a percent, enough to warm the upper atmospheres of both Earth and Mars. The change was minute, but measurable, a restoration of balance, as if someone had adjusted the thermostat of existence. Nguyen smiled. For years, she had sought proof that the universe was aware of us. But the lesson was simpler. The universe was aware, and we were part of its awareness. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was gratitude. When she closed her eyes, she could still see the spiral glowing behind her eyelids, turning slowly, endlessly, as if the cosmos were reminding her that evidence is only the beginning of understanding. The rest is listening. If you're still with me, breathe. You've crossed from data into memory, now the part of the story that no longer cares about calibration or error margins. This is where science becomes myth, and myth turns out to be data written in symbols. Let's go back 10,000 years ago, when the ice sheets retreated and the first astronomers carved calendars into bone. Something appeared in the sky they couldn't name. Across continents that never met, They all drew the same symbol, a long, curved line crowned with fire. The Sumerians called it Mulmul, at last the returning flame. The Mayans called it Ixchel's tear. The Egyptians simply drew a circle with wings. Every 3.5 millennia, they said, it returns. It crosses the path of Mars and whispers to the dust. We laughed at that until 2025, when 3 Ayatlas arrived from the exact region of the sky, described in those same texts. The constellation of Sagittarius, the place of origin for both myth and mathematics. Coincidence, again, or a cycle we forgot how to read. Imagine standing in ancient Ur, 4,000 years before telescopes, watching the heavens blaze. Priests record the visitation on clay tablets. A star of stone approached the red wanderer. The air grew thin, and the gods slept. Translation errors, of course. Except that the radiocarbon dating of those tablets aligns within a century to one of the previous near passes of an object on a 3,600-year orbit. Even our most conservative celestial mechanics can't explain that precision. They saw something. They just described it in poetry. You might ask, why Mars? Why does this ancient pattern always circle back to that quiet red world? Perhaps because Mars is both mirror and grave. It's what Earth could have been, and what Earth might become. Its desiccated plains still hum with magnetic scars, traces of a vanished field that once protected oceans and air. Something turned it off, and some scientists, like Dr. Eleonora Stein from the Max Planck Institute, have suggested it didn't happen randomly. Magnetic collapse can be induced, she said during a 2023 symposium, if external electromagnetic fields intersect at harmonic resonance. She wasn't talking about alien technology, but she was describing a process you could repeat if you wanted to terraform a planet or restore one. And maybe that's what those sky gods were doing. Thousands of years before us, resetting Mars in cycles, tuning it like an instrument, each pass a new attempt. In one fragment of the Babylonian Enuma Anu Enlil, there's a phrase that haunts me. When the red star sighs, the waters below awaken. Modern translators render sigh as vent, a plume, a jet. Exactly what astronomers saw when Atlas ejected gas toward the sun. Not away. Ancient language catching up to modern physics. If those tablets truly recorded an earlier visitation, it means we are witnessing the next movement in a pattern older than civilization itself. The rhythm of this pattern: 3 silences, 1 return. 3 silences again matches the same sequence found in pyramids, Mayan codices, even Norse sagas. Always a triad of dark ages, followed by renewal. 3,000 years of forgetting, then something comes back, and the sky burns anew. Now, the data whispers the same refrain. 3. Atlas Mars silence awakening. If the pattern holds, what comes next is not destruction, but activation. Maybe they weren't gods. Maybe they were scientists. Civilizations so old, their tools looked like miracles, their ships like stars. They may have called themselves gardeners or custodians, or maybe they didn't call themselves anything at all. You see, our myths talk about creation in past tense, but creation might be maintenance, routine upkeep on a planetary scale. That's the terrible and comforting thought, isn't it? That none of this is random, that we are living in someone else's experiment, still running, still stable enough to sleep inside. And if that's true, then what's happening now, the silence, the shutdown, the missing images, isn't a cover-up. It's protocol. The human species simply isn't authorized to see the next phase until we're ready to interpret it. Maybe that's why you're here tonight, halfway between dream and comprehension, because somewhere deep down, you know that the stars aren't watching you. They're waiting for you to wake up. So let's anchor ourselves. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Hold for 3. Exhale for 6. Again. And as you do, picture the red planet turning slowly beneath the dark, that faint green smudge passing overhead, ancient as memory. If you listen carefully, the radio static between frequencies isn't empty. It's a chorus of data whispering across time. We just haven't learned the language yet. Tell me, what would you call them? The beings who return, repair, and leave again. Architects, engineers, ancestors? Or maybe they're simply what we become, thousands of years from now, looping backward through our own timeline to make sure we survive it. Wherever you are tonight, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the sky as it looked before history began. A single bright star moving across the dark. No words for it, no fear. Just the quiet realization that you've seen this before, and you'll see it again. That's the rhythm of the universe. Discovery, realization, return. But that was only one cycle. There's another, one written not in myth, but in light years. History never stays buried. It simply waits, sleeping beneath the noise of new discoveries until someone whispers its name again. That is how it began for 3I Atlas, not with a revelation, but with a rediscovery. In early January, a team at the British Museum digitized a set of Sumerian tablets, thought to be routine agricultural ledgers. Hidden among the grain records was a fragment of text describing a wandering stone of fire that crossed the sky every 3,600 years. The translation had existed for decades, but a new ultraviolet scan revealed an extra line invisible to the naked eye. It breathes upon the red world. Those 6 words echoed through the scientific underground like a low note struck on a distant bell. Mars, the red world, breathing. The phrase linked myth to data, antiquity to telemetry. Carla Nguyen received the tablet image from a linguist friend with a simple message: "You'll want to see this." She opened it in the same dim office, where the hum of computers felt like the pulse of the cosmos. The line glowed faintly on her screen, and she couldn't help but whisper the words aloud. It breathes upon the red world. That night, she dreamed of a planet covered in frost, sighing once before dawn. The next morning, she pulled every record of cometary observations from the ancient world. Babylonian star maps, Mayan codices, Egyptian sky charts, all described the same returning object. A curved trail of light, green as copper flame, that passed close to Mars before vanishing toward the Sunday. Scholars had long dismissed the stories as coincidental, but now, with the data from 3I Atlas in hand, coincidence no longer seemed enough. Nguyen contacted Dr. Eleonora Stein again, asking for access to the spectral library at the Max Planck Institute. Within hours, they overlaid the emissions from 3I Atlas with readings taken from mineral deposits inside ancient Martian meteorites. The patterns matched. The isotope ratios of carbon dioxide were identical, right down to the trace impurities of nickel and sulfur. It was as if the same event that had left its signature on those meteorites thousands of years ago had just replayed itself in the modern sky. Stein stared at the graphs and whispered, "We've seen this before." If that was true, then the question wasn't what 3I Atlas was. It was why it kept coming back. Later that week, the pair received a message from an archaeologist stationed in northern Iraq. His team had unearthed a stele near the ruins of ancient Nineveh, depicting a winged sphere hovering above a crescent planet. Beneath it were cuneiform symbols translating loosely to the return of balance. Carbon dating placed the carving around 10,000 years old, within a century of the last orbital cycle that would have brought the object through this region of space. It was not proof, but it was rhythm, and rhythm is what the cosmos uses instead of punctuation. Nguyen spent that evening cross-referencing the orbital models with historical records. Every 3,600 years, Earth and Mars aligned within a narrow corridor along the same path 3I Atlas now traveled. The timing of floods, volcanic winters, and even surges in atmospheric carbon dioxide all matched the same cadence. Each cycle brought renewal and silence afterward. The ancients had simply called it the breathing of the gods. What if they were right, but not about gods? What if they were describing maintenance, a cosmic respiration, keeping planetary systems alive just long enough for life to endure? By the end of February, this theory began to spread quietly through encrypted channels among scientists, too curious to stop asking. They called it the custodian hypothesis. Its premise was disarmingly simple. Civilization is not the first gardener of the solar system. There were others before us, older than writing, leaving behind self-sustaining mechanisms disguised as natural phenomena. Comets, asteroids, even storms machines wrapped in myth. 3I Atlas might not be a message from elsewhere, but a scheduled return, a pulse in an ongoing planetary heartbeat. And if that were true, then the silence around it was not secrecy, but protocol. Nguyen's dreams grew heavier. She began hearing faint static in everyday sounds, the hum of her refrigerator, the whisper of wind against windows. Once, during a quiet dawn, she recorded it on her phone and slowed the playback. The pattern of peaks matched the binary sequence from the ESA archive. Exactly. Whatever 3I Atlas had awakened, it had followed her home. In March, an independent observatory in New Zealand captured something extraordinary, a reflection of the sun on Mars that lasted precisely 43 minutes. Too long to be atmospheric ice, too short for geological fluorescence. When amplified, the reflection resolved into a grid, straight lines, crossing at right angles over Utopia, Planitia, the same region where ancient myths placed the descent of the sky seed. The image spread briefly across scientific networks, before vanishing behind non-disclosure agreements. But once seen, it could not be unseen. Standing in her office, Carla whispered to herself, "Echoes don't fade, they evolve." She realized that history might not be linear at all. It was cyclic, breathing like the object that inspired it. Every age receives its own visitation, its own awakening. Humanity had simply inherited the role of witness this time. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and let the darkness fill the room until she could hear her own pulse. For a fleeting moment, it matched the rhythm of the ancient signal. Then, somewhere between waking and sleep, she understood the quiet truth that every scientist eventually faces. Discovery is not the act of learning something new, but of remembering something the universe never forgot. And in that remembrance, she felt it, the unmistakable sense that 3I Atlas was still out there, tracing its invisible curve through time, returning again not by chance but by design, carrying within its silence the memory of every civilization that had ever looked up and wondered whether the stars were watching back. Let's leave Earth for a moment. Float beyond the thin blue film of our atmosphere. Imagine you're weightless, drifting through the Black Sea between Mars and Jupiter. There, Hanging against the void moves 3I Atlas, a glimmer of dust and purpose, a clockwork seed traveling faster than comprehension and yet perfectly, eerily aligned with everything we call home. From this distance, the planets become quiet pearls threaded on invisible lines. Venus burns white and smooth. Earth glows with restless clouds. And Mars is the ember. Small, cold, but never quite extinguished. Astronomers track 3I Atlas, crossing that red orbit at 29 million kilometers, the closest any interstellar body has ever brushed a living world. At that range, even a whisper of chemical exchange could matter. Ions colliding with upper atmosphere, microscopic dust altering magnetic flow. Data from the trace gas orbiter shows a 0.04% rise in high-altitude methane during the same week the object passed. Too small to panic over, too perfect to ignore. It's as if the cosmos coughed and Mars inhaled. Zoom out further. Our solar system is a speck wrapped around an ordinary star, itself circling the Milky Way once every 230 million years. And yet, somehow, this speck has been visited 3 times in less than a human lifetime. First by Oumuamua, then 2 Borisov, now 3I Atlas. 3 interstellar visitors arriving in sequence like notes of a repeating signal. Dr. Avi Loeb called it the statistical heresy. He said, either we are impossibly lucky or we are being included. In other words, if you roll cosmic dice long enough and keep getting the same number, maybe it isn't luck anymore. Now, imagine Atlas's path as seen from above, a long arc that kisses the orbits of 3 planets, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and then curves toward the Sunday. Each encounter slows it slightly, like a swimmer gliding from current to current. That's orbital mechanics, but it's also choreography. When Loeb ran the model backward, the trajectory originated not from the chaotic outer galaxy, but from the thick disk, a region of ancient, metal-poor stars, a neighborhood older than the Sunday. So maybe Atlas didn't wander here. Maybe it was launched. And if that's true, its journey would have started before Earth formed. 4.5 billion years of travel, waiting for us to finally have eyes sharp enough to notice. But let's stay honest. It could still be natural. Nature, after all, has a flair for design. Snowflakes are symmetrical. Galaxies spiral in Fibonacci swirls. Who's to say a comet can't act deliberate just by accident? Yet, every time the numbers align too neatly, another anomaly appears. Brightness fluctuating exactly when the sun's magnetic field reverses. Outgassing that pulses with the same rhythm as the Schumann resonances in Earth's ionosphere. Patterns that link the smallest frequencies of our planet to something millions of kilometers away. Coincidence? Step back one more scale. From the edge of the heliosphere, the sun is no larger than a spark. Its light takes 8 minutes to reach Earth, but more than 16 hours to touch the edges of our planetary bubble. Beyond that lies the interstellar medium, thin, dark, nearly empty. And into that emptiness, 3I Atlas will vanish again unless it performs the impossible, slowing down. For an object moving 87,000 kilometers per hour, even a slight deceleration means intent, a whisper of thrust, a decision. Some simulations predict it will do exactly that on October 29th, 2025, when it disappears behind the Sunday. If it fires, if it slows, it could remain bound to our star forever. Invisible, but here, a silent moon for the sun itself. Now pause, breathe. because in that possibility lies something tender. Maybe the universe doesn't send us messages in words or symbols. Maybe it sends us visitors' patterns written in orbital mechanics, repeating until we finally listen. And when you stare long enough at that green glowing coma, you begin to feel a strange empathy for it. A traveler too old for its own origin, passing through a system young enough to call it alien. Maybe it's not here to frighten us. Maybe it's lonely. As scientists map trajectories, poets see mirrors. We chart Atlas's orbit the way ancient priests mapped God's numbers wrapped around ore. We calculate delta V and gravitational assists. But what we're really measuring is humility. Because from out here, humanity looks small, but not insignificant. We're the first species that can point at a moving dot in space and ask not just what it is, but why. You, floating there in thought, might wonder, if it stays, what then? Does it become part of our system, a permanent wanderer between Mars and Earth? Will future generations look up and call it a second moon, or an omen, or a sign? And when they ask what we did the first time it appeared, will we tell them the truth that we were too busy arguing about funding while the sky rewrote itself? Listen closely. There's a hum beneath the background noise of the universe, what radio astronomers call the cosmic microwave background, but you might call the sound of memory. It's not silence. It's everything that's ever happened, still vibrating. Maybe 3I Atlas isn't a messenger at all. Maybe it's an echo, a reflection of something that happened long ago, a civilization that once looked up, just as we do now, and launched a fragment of itself into forever. And across billions of years, that fragment finally came home. Maybe this has all happened before. Maybe it happens every time a young species learns to dream beyond its planet. Each time, a new atlas appears not to warn, not to save, but to remind that we are part of a rhythm measured not in lifetimes, but in light years. But that was only one orbit, the whisper says. There's another, closer to home. Let's return to humanity. When you stare long enough at the stars, something strange happens. The universe stops feeling like a place you look at and starts feeling like a thing that's looking back. That was where the scientists now found themselves, in the uneasy space between wonder and surveillance. By spring of 2026, the pulse from 3I Atlas had faded into background radiation, but its consequences had just begun to unfold. From the edge of our atmosphere to the cold silence of the Kuiper Belt, instruments began to hum with new irregularities. The James Webb Space Telescope, staring toward the thick disk of the Milky Way, captured an unexplainable pattern in the light of distant stars. Faint, dimming waves repeating in a Fibonacci rhythm. The intervals mirrored the same ratio found in Psyche's final spiral transmission. Coincidence, perhaps? Or maybe the universe was practicing self-portraiture. On Earth, humanity kept looking for meaning. Some called it the awakening of cosmic consciousness. Others said it was nothing more than solar interference. But for Carla Nguyen, it was proof that 3I Atlas had never left. It had simply widened its lens. Late one evening, she watched a live feed from the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. The sun glowed, as it always had, blinding, constant but in one frame. A thin arc of darkness slipped across its lower hemisphere, like the shadow of a needle threading the fabric of light. It moved too slowly to be debris, and too gracefully to be a sensor glitch. It looked like an orbit, deliberate and controlled. When she enhanced the frame, she saw the faintest halo of green fluorescence outlining the shape. Something was now circling the sun itself. She called Stein in Germany, her voice trembling. "It's still here," she said. Stein didn't ask what it was. She already knew. "Then we were part of it all along," she replied. The revelation was quiet but enormous. If 3I Atlas had settled into solar orbit, it was now the sun's secret moon, a watcher bound not to Earth or Mars, but to the star that birthed both, the first artificial satellite of the sun, and perhaps the oldest. Over the next weeks, evidence mounted. Solar observatories detected a rhythmic cooling in the corona, a sequence of temperature dips aligning with the same phi ratio pattern. It was as though the sun itself were exhaling. The press ignored it. The public slept through it. But among the few who paid attention, the mood shifted from curiosity to reverence. Nguyen began giving private lectures she never recorded. In them, she said, "Maybe this is what the ancients meant when they spoke of gods. Not deities, but instruments. Machines that maintain creation by teaching it how to remember." She spoke softly, like someone confessing a dream. Her audiences left in silence, as though stepping out of a cathedral built entirely of vacuum. Then came the quiet experiments. A global network of amateur radio operators began transmitting harmonic tones toward the sun, just to see what would happen. Most received nothing but static, but one night, a signal bounced back faint, delayed by precisely 8 minutes and 20 seconds, the time it takes sunlight to reach Earth. The returning tone was inverted, as if mirrored. It carried no words, no modulation, only symmetry. For days, radio boards filled with confusion. The signal could have been natural resonance, an echo from solar plasma. Yet one operator pointed out that the inversion began not at the transmission frequency, but at the golden ratio of it. 3I Atlas had answered, not with language, but with math, the first universal dialect. Nguyen listened to the recording over and over. In headphones, the hum felt almost tender, like someone running a fingertip across the edge of consciousness. She realized then that the object wasn't sending messages, it was tuning us, adjusting the frequency of human perception, one subtle resonance at a time. Her dreams grew stranger. She floated through a lattice of light shaped like a spiral galaxy, and everywhere she looked, smaller spirals repeated atoms, cells, hurricanes, minds, each layer humming with the same vibration. She woke one night to find her pulse syncing with the rhythm. For a moment, she could feel the orbit of Earth beneath her heartbeat. Meanwhile, Mars began to change. Satellites observed faint auroras over its equator, impossible without a magnetic field. But there they were, delicate curtains of emerald light flickering above the red dust. The planet that had long been silent was beginning to hum back. At a conference in Geneva, Stein presented the findings under the cautious title Transient Ionization, Events in the Martian Upper Atmosphere. No one in the room used the word life, but everyone thought it. A few noticed the timing matched the sun's new oscillations. The cause was labeled unresolved interaction. Quote, "It was a smarning it's no to be use. Rest." Nguyen watched the presentation remotely, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. "It's breathing again," she whispered. The phrase had followed her since the first blackout, and now it belonged to a planet. In the months that followed, a subtle shift crept into the collective imagination. Artists began painting suns with halos. Poets wrote of luminous orbits. Musicians composed songs in patterns of phi. The change was cultural as much as cosmic, as if the human species was quietly adjusting to a broader tempo. And through it all, the hum persisted, not loud enough to command, but steady enough to remind. It became impossible to tell where science ended and mythology began. The more the data accumulated, the more it resembled scripture, numerical parables, spectral psalms, the cosmos preaching in silence. When Nguyen spoke of it for the last time, she did not mention equations or orbits. She said only this: perspective is the universe learning to look at itself. Every observer is a mirror, and every mirror deepens the reflection. Maybe 3I Atlas was never an intruder. Maybe it was the first lesson in how to see. That night, she went outside and looked up. The stars seemed impossibly close, as though the sky had lowered itself to meet her gaze. She felt weightless, but not small part of the machinery, not apart from it. And somewhere, circling the sun in perfect silence, the green halo turned once more, patient as eternity, watching over the fragile spark that finally understood it had been seen. We're back now home, back under the faint hum of city lights, the smell of rain, and the faint glow that hides the stars. It feels almost absurd, doesn't it? After everything we've imagined planets breathing, ancient engineers, cosmic seeds, you're still here, lying in bed, with your screen dimmed and your eyes heavy. And yet, something in you feels different, as if part of your mind stayed out there with 3I Atlas, orbiting the unknown. Let's ground ourselves. Right now, above your ceiling, the entire sky is moving at 1,600 kilometers per hour because Earth is spinning. You're hurtling around the sun at 107,000 kilometers per hour, and our whole solar system is drifting through the galaxy at 828,000 kilometers per hour. Yet you don't feel it. You only feel gravity, and that's the strange poetry of it. We are racing through infinity while convinced we're still. Sometimes, I wonder if the universe built us to feel still so we wouldn't panic. In every story of cosmic mystery, there's always a moment when the science gives way to something personal, because deep down, the question isn't really about 3I Atlas. It's about us. What would we do if it was intelligent? Would we welcome it or weaponize it? Would we see it as proof of something divine or a threat to everything sacred? There's a saying from Carl Sagan: for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. Maybe that's the truth behind all these investigations and late-night scripts and whispering telescopes. We're trying to love what we don't understand. So, what does 3I Atlas mean for humanity? If it's real, it means we're not the first. If it's natural, it means the cosmos is stranger than we dared to imagine. Either way, we win. Because awe pure, unfiltered awe, is a kind of victory. It humbles you into perspective. Think of it. Every human argument, every border, every invoice, every missed text, it's happening on a pebble suspended in darkness. And maybe that's the point. Maybe these cosmic visitors aren't here to terrify us, but to remind us that we're still children awake too late, staring at the stars, trying to understand our parents. Now imagine, just for a moment, that 3I Atlas really is a construct, an old machine carrying messages across time, and that someone, somewhere, is watching us the way we watch Mars. Would they see chaos or potential? Would they find a species afraid of endings, or one finally ready to evolve? If you could speak to them, to whatever intelligence engineered such a thing, what would you say? Would you ask for proof, or would you ask for mercy? Maybe that's why this story feels so heavy at midnight, because it's not really about discovery, it's about readiness, and readiness is quiet. You've probably noticed how, after each act, the silence lingers longer. That's by design. It mirrors the way the universe expands. Slower, colder, but still stretching. Entropy as a lullaby. Close your eyes for a second. Feel your pulse. That rhythm, your heart, is the same rhythm the sun keeps. A pulse of nuclear fusion, once every 11 years. You are, in a literal sense, part of its timing. Every element in your blood, iron, carbon, oxygen, was forged in a dying star. So when you breathe out, you're releasing starlight that learned how to feel. Sometimes I think about the first people who looked up and called the stars gods. They weren't wrong, not exactly. They were just using a different vocabulary for the same truth. The cosmos creates and destroys, gives and takes, teaches and forgets, like any parent or any dream. If 3I Atlas is part of that process, if it's just one more heartbeat in the body of the universe, then we're part of it too. We always were. Tell me, if you could choose between freedom and understanding, which would you pick? Would you rather be a mystery or solve one? Because sometimes knowledge feels like a trap, doesn't it? You open one door and find 1,000 more, and still, you look, you can't help it. That's what makes us human, the refusal to stop asking, even when the answers might unmake us. You might be drifting now. That's okay. Let the thought of 3I Atlas move to the edge of your mind, like a lantern fading in fog, still there, but softer. Maybe tomorrow you'll forget most of this. Maybe you'll only remember the feeling, the weight of wonder pressed gently against your chest. That's enough. That's how awe works. It leaves fingerprints, not memories. Look up one last time, in your mind. See the red planet glowing faintly. See that small green comet machine, myth, miracle curling behind the sunday. And realize, whether it's natural or engineered, it's now part of us, our orbit, our story. And stories never really end. But that was only one reflection. The voice whispers, there's one more, the quietest one of all. Let's fade into the great silence. Every great mystery eventually turns its gaze back toward the observer. By the time the public stopped asking what 3I Atlas was, the question had shifted into something far more intimate, what its discovery said about us. The scientists had grown quiet, the agencies had turned their servers back to ordinary work, and the data no longer made headlines. But in living rooms and lecture halls, in art galleries and lonely late-night cafes, people began to talk about the same strange feeling, that humanity had been given a mirror too large for comfort. Carla Nguyen felt it most of all. The silence from the object left an ache that words couldn't fill. She'd spent years listening for the voice of the cosmos, and now that voice had gone still, leaving her with her own reflection. At first, she mistook the feeling for grief, but grief fades. This didn't. It felt more like transformation, the quiet rearranging of one's inner orbit. One morning she woke before dawn and walked outside, barefoot on cold pavement, the city still asleep around her. The air smelled faintly of rain and ozone. Overhead, the last stars dimmed against the bruised glow of sunrise. She realized she could no longer look at the sky without expecting it to look back. The awareness was gentle, not paranoid, like standing before a painting that finally recognizes its viewer. Every civilization in history has faced this threshold, the moment it sees itself reflected in the unknown. When ancient sailors found their constellations mirrored in the sea, they built myths to make the reflection bearable. When early astronomers saw craters on the moon, they named them after saints and philosophers. Humanity has always needed metaphor to survive revelation. The cosmos reveals. Language softens the blow. Now the metaphor was three-eye atlas. A machine, or a messenger, or a mirage. Whatever it truly was, it had changed how people dreamed. Across continents, children began drawing green halos in the corners of their notebooks. Musicians composed pieces in slow spirals of sound, repeating in intervals of 8 minutes and 43 seconds, the pulse that once marked the spacecraft's heartbeat. Painters filled their canvases with soft concentric circles, as though trying to remember something the world had almost forgotten. Nguyen watched this quiet cultural drift with awe and unease. The scientific part of her wanted to catalogue it, to measure the contagion of meaning. But the human part of her understood that not everything true can be graphed. Maybe this was what awakening looked like, not the discovery of alien life, but the recognition that we had always been part of something alive. In March, she was invited to speak at a small university in Lisbon. The topic was officially post-anomalous cosmology, but the students wanted to hear about wonder. She spoke without notes, pacing slowly under the warm yellow lights of the auditorium. If three-eye atlas was natural, she said, then nature is more intelligent than we imagined. If it was artificial, then intelligence is more natural than we believed. Either way, the distance between creator and creation has grown thin. A student asked, "Do you think it wanted us to find it?" She paused. "I think it wanted us to notice ourselves finding it. It may be Cain." Yet, the room fell into the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Some of the students began to cry without knowing why. When she finished, they thanked her as though she'd given them permission to breathe. On the flight home, Nguyen stared out the window at the curvature of Earth. The clouds below looked like the surface of another planet, luminous and ancient. For a moment she felt untethered, unsure whether she was looking down or up. That was when she realized the true gift Three-Eye Atlas had left behind, perspective that no longer obeyed gravity. The following months brought a strange peace to her life. She taught, she wrote, she watched the world rediscover quiet. People were kinder, slower, more curious. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe the echo of cosmic attention had softened us. Social networks filled with questions about the night sky, not arguments. Documentaries about ancient astronomy trended again. Children memorized the names of planets the way older generations had memorized pop songs. Humanity had begun, tentatively, to remember its place. One evening, as she graded papers, Nguyen noticed a faint vibration through the floor, too slow for machinery, too steady for passing traffic. She checked the clock. 8 minutes and 43 seconds later, it came again. A soft, rhythmic hum, felt more than heard. She smiled but said nothing. Whatever it was, it no longer frightened her. It was simply the universe breathing, and she was part of its lungs. Later that night, she turned off the lights and let the room go completely dark. In the window, her reflection merged with the stars outside. Her face became a constellation for a heartbeat, then vanished into the night. She whispered to the reflection, "Maybe you were never out there. Maybe you were always in here." Across the world, similar realizations bloomed like quiet flowers. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station began describing dreams of luminous spirals. Radio astronomers reported déjà vu when scanning empty parts of the sky. Pilots claimed to see faint emerald arcs dancing in the upper atmosphere, though no radar confirmed it. Each story alone sounded trivial, but together they formed a pattern too human to ignore, a species collectively learning to feel cosmic again. And so, in living rooms and observatories alike, The great silence no longer felt empty. It felt compassionate. It felt alive. 3i Atlas had become less an event and more a state of mind. The awareness that somewhere between curiosity and humility lies the true reflection of intelligence. In her final journal entry that year, Nguyen wrote, "Perhaps contact was never about them reaching us. Perhaps it was about us becoming something worth reaching." She closed the notebook, left it on the windowsill, and went to sleep to the rhythm of a planet still learning to listen. Outside, the wind carried the faintest shimmer of green through the night sky, so delicate, so easily dismissed as chance. But if you had been awake, if you had listened closely enough, you might have heard the universe inhale, just once, before exhaling again into the dream of tomorrow. There comes a moment, at the end of every story, when even truth grows tired of being spoken. The universe does not end with an explosion or a scream. It ends with understanding. And understanding, as every sleeper knows, sounds a lot like rest. By the time humanity stopped searching for 3i Atlas, the silence had already changed us. It was no longer absence but invitation, a doorway into a quieter kind of knowing. Years had passed since the last recorded pulse. Psyche was still adrift, faithful as ever, transmitting data that no one truly needed anymore. Its solar panels shimmered faintly against the black, the hum of its systems, a whisper in an infinite cathedral. The scientists who had once lost sleep over its mystery had retired or died, leaving behind archives of curiosity bound together by equations and awe. Yet deep in those archives, nestled between forgotten directories, one folder continued to change its date every few months. No new files appeared. Only the metadata shifted, as if time itself were brushing past, to remind us that something still remembered. Carla Nguyen no longer checked the updates. She had grown older, gentler, her hair silvering at the edges like moonlight caught in thought. She lived in a small house near the sea now, where the nights were darker and the stars came closer. The world had moved on. New telescopes, new missions, new crises. But sometimes, she still woke before dawn, feeling the same hum beneath her ribs that had once echoed through machines. She called it the second heartbeat. The ocean outside her window breathed in long, slow waves, as though in conversation with something larger. One night, unable to sleep, she walked to the shore. The tide glowed faintly with bioluminescent algae, a field of tiny stars caught in water. Each step she took set off ripples of light. For a moment, she imagined herself walking across the memory of the cosmos. Each footfall, another reminder that even silence leaves a trail. When she looked up, she saw the faint emerald shimmer that had haunted the world for decades. It wasn't a comet anymore, or perhaps it never had been. It was simply there, an echo suspended between the orbits of Mars and Earth, a thread of memory looping endlessly through the dark. She whispered, "You're still awake." The words vanished into wind, but the shimmer pulsed once, as if nodding. In that moment, she understood what the ancients had tried to say with their myths of returning gods and breathing stars. They were never talking about celestial visitors. They were talking about cycles of planets, of consciousness, of becoming. 3i Atlas had not been a messenger. It had been a mirror, showing humanity what it looks like when seen from the outside. And the reflection, though small, had been beautiful. Nguyen closed her eyes and listened. The surf, the wind, the slow rhythm of her heart, each sound folded into the next, until there was no distinction between her and the sea, between the sea and the stars. It was all one sound, stretched across eternity. Somewhere beyond the horizon, radio telescopes still scanned the sky, though fewer people cared about what they might find. The data streamed endlessly: cosmic background, solar wind, whispers of pulsars. But among the noise, an old algorithm still searched for a particular frequency, the signature of the pulse that once defined a generation of dreamers. Late one night, it found something: a single beat, faint but distinct, arriving from the direction of the Sunday. It lasted less than half a second, then disappeared. The system logged it automatically. Anomaly detected. No one noticed. No headlines followed. The world was asleep, as perhaps it should be. At dawn, light spilled across the ocean. Nguyen sat on the sand, watching the horizon blush with warmth. The hum inside her chest faded until it was indistinguishable from the heartbeat of the planet. She smiled. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to record, just the comfort of having been part of a story large enough to hold her. She thought of Psyche, still out there, orbiting through the quiet. She thought of the countless instruments pointed toward the void, each one a fragment of human hope. She thought of the silence that now filled the universe, not empty, but full of waiting. "If you ever wake again," she said softly, "teach us how to listen better." The waves answered with a sigh, far beyond her sight. In the space between planets, a small object drifted in perfect stillness. Its surface, once scarred with cosmic dust, now glowed faintly from within. No engines burned, no sensors blinked, yet its orbit remained steady, balanced precisely between gravity and grace. If anyone had been close enough to see, they might have noticed a pattern of light rippling across it in slow intervals. 1, then 2, then 3. Not a signal, a lullaby. Back on Earth, night fell again. Cities dimmed their lights to save power, and for the first time in centuries, the Milky Way returned, in full bloom across the sky. People looked up, saw the endless sweep of stars, and felt no fear, only calm recognition. The universe had always been singing. We had just learned the melody too late in the song to claim it as our own. As the hours stretched, the faint emerald glow beyond Mars faded into blackness, its orbit merging with the sun's golden rhythm. Whether it had been machine, myth, or miracle no longer mattered. It had done what all great teachers do: arrived, revealed, and retreated. The rest was up to its students. Nguyen finally stood and turned back toward her home. The wind carried the scent of salt and starlight. She whispered one last time, "Sleep well." Above her, the cosmos obliged, and in that vast, tender stillness, Earth continued to fall gracefully around the sun, each rotation another breath in the long dream of creation. The hum was gone now, replaced by something quieter understanding. Somewhere, perhaps on a future morning long after memory dissolves, another watcher will look up, find a glimmer in the dark, and name it anew. They will not know her name, nor ours, but they will feel the same question rising within them. What if the silence isn't the end, but the beginning of listening? And then, as always, the great silence will begin again. We've reached the quiet part now, the part where the story forgets it's a story and turns into something softer, a rhythm, a heartbeat, a drifting frequency that doesn't need meaning anymore. Close your eyes. The lights in the room fade, one by one. The air hums faintly, and even the hum seems tired of being sound. Outside, the planet keeps turning. We are still orbiting, still falling, gracefully, around a star that doesn't know our names. Let's remember what we've seen. The first silence, the one that began when Psyche went dark. The second, the blackout during the shutdown. And the third, the silence behind the Sunday. 3 voids, perfectly spaced, like the breaths of something asleep. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. A long inhale across the solar wind, a pause, and an exhale that stretches across 1 billion kilometers. Maybe that's what 3I Atlas really is: not a ship, not a weapon, but a breath, a sigh of the universe, reminding us that even stars have to rest. You might think of all the questions that will never be answered. Was it natural? Was it made? Did someone send it? Did we call it here? But answers, like light, fade with distance. And the further we look, the more we realize the mystery was the point. There's a kind of mercy in that. To not know, to simply wonder and drift. Breathe with me. In 4 seconds. Hold for 2. Out. 6. Again. Slower now. Feel gravity holding you where you are. The same gravity that holds the planets in their invisible dance. Different scales, same pull. You, the Earth, the Sun, the Comet, they're all following the same rule. We never stop falling. We just learn to fall in circles. They say silence is empty. It isn't. It's full of potential, like the space between heartbeats or the gap between lightning and thunder. It's where everything waits before becoming real. Maybe that's why the universe is mostly quiet. Not because it's lifeless, but because it's thinking. So, here's the last question, the one no telescope can answer. If the universe is alive, what does it dream about? Does it dream of us? Of worlds learning to see themselves? Of small, bright minds whispering stories into the dark, trying not to be afraid? Or does it simply dream of silence, the perfect stillness, after a long, cosmic breath? Whatever the truth, it's enough to know we're part of that dream. The atoms in your hands were born in suns older than memory. You are stardust learning to rest. So let yourself drift. Let the hum fade until it becomes nothing. Let thoughts slow, heartbeat by heartbeat, into orbit. No fear, no noise, just the echo of creation, still unfolding somewhere far beyond comprehension. And when you wake again, hours, centuries, or lifetimes from now, you'll remember none of this clearly, only a feeling, a weightless calm, a sense that something vast and ancient turned its gaze toward you and smiled. Close your eyes. You've heard all you need to hear. Let your mind drift with the orbit of tomorrow. Sleep, traveler. Sleep, witness. Sleep, fragment of light still learning how to glow. The great silence begins now.